Sure, I'll try. I paint watercolor children's portraits, and they're quite different from what I paint in acrylic and oil. They're pretty well defined and detailed, and yet loose. I want the child to be casual in their own environment and their own spirit. It's very important to me that I capture their personality as opposed to just a look of the child. So they've got to be both who they are physically and who they are spiritually, so to speak, in spirit. And then for relaxation, I paint in oil and acrylics what I want to paint, which I kind of explore from one. As soon as I figure out what I'm doing on one concept, all my life I've tended to go to the next new challenge. That's always kept me inspired. I still tend to go to figures. When I was young, I don't know exactly when, but I realized that I had to make a decision because most artists can paint anything. You know, you can decide you love flowers today, and you can decide that you love whatever tomorrow. You're going to make leaves one day, flowers one day, and you're going to make people one day and landscapes one day. Well, you really need to, if you're going to sell your work and make any living from it, people have to identify you with something. So that's when I went to portraits. I first thought, what do I love the most? What intrigues me the most? And it's really people's faces. And actually, it's not happy, cheerful people's faces. I'm more intrigued by expressions that might have deeper meaning. So that's what I would do or used to do in oil and acrylics. Now that I'm a little older, I sometimes just tend to do women. I particularly like to sculpt. I sculpt women and I paint women. And they're very almost boxy, square-shaped people, not realistic, and they're flat.
Yeah, I noticed that.
They're stylized, I guess is the best way to say it. But I'm trying to put them in situations that are everyday, that we all have, and maybe express something about the situation. For example, I sold one, and I really liked it. It was a big red sewing machine. She was a factory worker, and she looks just like my other boxy women, like you'd see on this wall. But if you looked harder, you'd realize that her hands were not attached to her wrists, and her wrists were not attached to her arms, because she used them in her job so much that she just becomes a production thing rather than a person. So I usually put hints of things in there that tell more of the story. Basically, art didn't let me quit because I wanted to be an artist, but didn't think that I could, that other people were more talented. Then when I spoke out and said I wanted to go to college and major in art, my family said, no, you need a job. So I did go to college, but I didn't major in art because I was pretty much an obedient person at that point in my life. And I could see their reason. So I went to the University of Richmond and I majored in a couple of things, English and elementary ed. But I took some art. And but after I was married and had my first child, she was, do you know what a SIDS baby is? It's a sudden infant death syndrome.
Oh.
It means they stop breathing. But I was fortunate because I caught her when that happened, and she's fine. She's 33 years old today. But I realized at that point that I had already realized that I was painting people. That was prior. But that I wanted an image of her that I saw. Not what a photographer saw, not what somebody else saw, but what I saw. So I painted for 2 years her, because we didn't hire a nurse, and she had to be monitored for that length of time. So I just painted her over and over and over in all sorts of poses, so that perfected my children's portraits. And that's really where they came from, and that's why it's so important to me to capture the spirit of the child, because it's a gift to the parents. And I have painted children, mostly happy, lively children, but I've also painted children that are no longer with us for their parents. And they love the portraits as a piece of their family history. And I've learned to be comfortable with all those kinds of things. And that's why. And that's with those 2 years, if you paint one child over and over again for 2 years, you really do learn to get exactly what you want. So that's why I said life didn't let me give up on it. So she was fine, and I had my second child, my first son, and I told my husband, I said, I'm just going to do children's portraits. I'm quitting any kind of work, and I'm going to do children's portraits for a living. So I was in my early 30s, and that's what I did. So I did the portraits for, oh gosh, 15 years. And that was primarily what I did for income. And then, of course, I did what was interesting and challenging to me for my relaxation in painting. Because to me, it's not just about making money. It's about exploring. It's really about challenging and experimentation and exploring what can happen and what I can do and what I can figure out. So it's constantly, I have that as a need. Once I'd figured out how to do the portraits, that was already, learned information. So I could repeat it and enjoy meeting the children and the families. But I didn't get that piece from the portraits that I get from exploration. So side by side, I was always doing my own thing. But for 15 years, that's what I pushed the most. When I went to shows, I pushed the portraits. Okay. I think it is hard to make a living, and you can't give up. But that's the simple side. Sometimes it's not bad to find an art-related job where you can make a certain amount of money. But if you spend too much time at that job, you won't get to paint. So if you want to go completely freelance, I think you need to maybe have a job for a few years, put some money in the bank so that you can freelance. It's a matter of getting to know people who know you and what you do and how to use it. Teaching is another avenue of, I've seen both graphic artists and teachers be able to also have a selling art career. But it doesn't necessarily mean you want to teach in elementary school or middle school. I've seen a lot of people get into the graphic arts world and retire early and then become a freelance artist because they've already got some contacts. I have two fellows that work here off and on, and they both have just a graduate degree, and one has a master's, and they're trying to do freelance. I'd say it takes 5 years to get started. I actually do another job because it's our family business, so I help my husband here. It's a family business. We can live on art money, but not the way we want to. Okay? So if I didn't help him here, that's what happened 15 years ago. And I kept saying, not 15 years ago, but 15 years after I was painting the children's portraits, the woman that helped him left town, and then he was unsuccessful finding anybody quickly, so I came down to help him, and I've been doing that part-time since. So I'm really aware of dividing your time and your inspiration, but it can be done. It really can. Elementary school is the hardest. I taught second grade. I really think elementary school is the hardest level to teach art in because you're having to meet parents' and principals' expectations for production. Where in middle school and high school, you can actually get a topic going and work it from one end to the other, okay? Where smaller children, you've got so many exterior expectations as far as bringing home this little pretty picture and that little pretty picture that you tend to, and they move you often from one school to the other, and so you tend to do project, and that's time-consuming and tiring. Maybe fourth and fifth grade, you can do a little bit more intensive, but it's so much better to, I think, be able in middle school or upper school or college to be able to find a, talk about color for a whole unit, or talk about shape or design or fractals or whatever it is that's impacting the next thing that they want to do or you want to teach them to do. But the difference between teaching in a school or college setting, I think, and teaching adults is that these students don't need to be shaped to learn how to make it in the world. The questions you were just asking about how to make it in the art world, these people are not going to do that. Rarely you might find someone who at an older age wants to start a career. Generally, these people want to paint well, and they wouldn't mind showing it somewhere. But they're here to relax. They're here to do as well as they can, so I don't push them in the same way that I would push a student if I were teaching a high school or middle school student or even a college student. I'm not, and push is a funny word, but I'm just saying I relate to these people in a gentler way, a very gentle way, and I enjoy that, and they bloom. And I don't agree that everybody should paint the same thing. I think that's sort of counterproductive, because you get insecurities that say mine is not as good as theirs and therefore I'm going to quit. I don't want anybody to see it. I think painting is very vulnerable when you do it in the classroom, because your line is your whole personality. I mean, your line makes your handwriting, your line makes your painting. Even if you're not painting with a line, even if you're painting with no drawing, your line is still such an internal identification of you that when you put it on canvas, you feel like everybody knows much about you. They don't, because they can't read what you can read into that line, but you feel it. So I'm really aware of that with my students, and I would be aware of that with students at any age. I think that's just really important. But the younger students, I might say to them, it's okay. It's okay. Let's keep pushing. Let's keep going. It's okay. If you don't like this piece, we'll put it in the trash and we'll do it again. Where an older person, I might help them learn how to fix that piece. So it's just a little different approach. Young children don't have any culturally adopted limitations.
Right, yeah.
And so their artwork is beautiful. They don't have that fear that I'm saying that we have to deal with all ages, but even more carefully with older folks. And it's so beautiful, and the children don't think you should outline everything. They just put it there, and that's nice. Their color sense is fantastic, and it's just so intuitive. And really, when we adults paint, we paint our best when we get into our intuitive zone and out of our head. My favorite children's portrait was of my son when he was little, and I didn't remember what I had done to get there. I painted it in about 2 hours. I looked at it and I thought, oh, this is wonderful. What did I do? And I couldn't remember a bit. And I was very disheartened, because I thought, oh, I can't do it again. Of course I could do it again. But it was between confidence and knowledge. But what I had done was gotten in a complete zone and just painted freely without thinking, and using the muscle memory that I had built up over the years. And now I know that you do that all the time. You might start in a very structured place because you're in the busy world, and you come out and you try to relax and you start to paint because a job is due or you want to paint. But somewhere in there, when you finally do stop thinking, you really start painting. And all of the practice that went in the trash can, or that got covered up, or that was successful, all of that comes into play with the next new painting. And so that's what practice is all about, just like music. So I used to say when I was your age, my trash can is my best friend, and nobody knew what I meant. But I've carried that kind of expression on with my students. Now remember, trash can is my best friend. Sort of a loose concept of accepting what you do well and being proud of it. And I also think you should take out what's not as successful. To hang it alongside what you know is successful is to confuse the viewer. I think I prefer sculpture and the 3 mediums that I like to work in the most. I like them because they're all more fluid and not as demanding of exactness. And I am not a master craftsman in any sense of the word. I am more of a open fluid artist. So the finesse that I want my drawings to have is a lot of energy, and I prefer the feeling of the wetness and the motion of both the clay and the paints. I like oil because it's so emotional. It oozes with color and depth and movement, and you can, of course, it stays open forever as long as you want to play in it, and you can move it around. I love that fluidness. You feel like you could almost jump into the color. It's so gorgeous. That's why I like oils. That's probably my favorite. Watercolor kept me captivated for a long, long time because it's got more information and it has more tricks that you can play with it if you know what your colors will do. And that's intriguing, just to experiment and see what you can make it do. And it didn't get repetitive for a long time, so I enjoyed exploring it for a very long time. And I'm sure that when I go back to watercolor more often, I'll learn more new things. But for years and years and years, it was very intriguing.
But nowadays it isn't so much.
To me, it isn't my favorite choice right now. I certainly, when I paint with the students, I certainly demonstrate, and we're all really very happy. But it's not, I know what to do. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, oops, done. Which is opposed to acrylic. I have never liked acrylic until in the last few years. I had some commissions I had to do them in acrylic because they had time lines on them and they were quite large. So you're trying to paint a 14-foot by 18-foot painting in 14 days, you have got to do acrylic. It's on site. Or you're trying to do an 11-foot by 8-foot painting, 4 of them in 4 weeks or 5 weeks, and send them up to New York. They've got to be acrylic. You can't. So that pushed me into doing acrylics. Some multiple of paintings, 24 paintings of this, all the same size, acrylic. And I find that it too has a beauty. It's not, to me, when you begin to use acrylic, that it's beautiful. It's very plastic looking. But after you learn to play in it and keep it open, and I don't think you have to buy open acrylics, just learn to keep it open, it can blend such gorgeous colors. And you can throw all these things in it. You can use ink with it. You can use, I've thrown pastel in it, or pastel dust in it to get an effect. So you can use your palette knives so well. And it is a little less expensive than oil, and it dries faster. So when I don't want to do heavy palette knife paintings, acrylics are fun. So I'd say that for me, oils are really serious, and watercolors are fairly serious, but acrylics are playful. And that's kind of an exaggeration because all of them are playful and pleasant, so I just love them. But acrylics are the most childlike.
Media.
I do think that paint and sculpture, whether it's marble or rock, whether it's take away or add on, such as clay, those two mediums or medias allow you to explore more than any other hand-worked sort of medium. For example, if I was going to make a lovely wooden bowl, I still have to make it a bowl, or it won't hold anything, and it's not a bowl. Or a mug out of clay, or a dress out of fabric. I can make it wonderfully, wildly outlandish with colors and points and buttons and ribbons, and I can do all of that to it, but it's still a dress. It's still a mug, and it's still a wooden bowl. With painting, it's not even in that format. Yes, it's still a painting, but it's not a functional thing. So with that painting, or even that sculpture, which is not a functional item, I can use them to explore and create something I've never thought of, and hopefully someone else has never thought of before, and say something I want to say that maybe I can't say in my daily life. Nobody's running around wanting to listen to me, but I could say it on a canvas and speak to another generation, whether it's now or in 20 years. So I think that the possibilities with those two mediums, and I've done both of them, are completely infinite. And I do think one builds the other. I stopped painting for about 6 years and sculpted, and when I went back, my painting was 6 years better. It wasn't the same. So I think they both have the challenge and the exploration, and they both have limitless possibilities, whether it's traditional or non-traditional. There are formulas for things, for color and for composition. There are formulas that you can teach and need to be taught, need to be learned. And I think that sometimes some of these things either are intuitive or they become intuitive after you've done them so long. So one thing, if a work is not assigned and you're free to do it on your own, I spend more time deciding how I'm going to present the concept than I do ever actually painting it. And it's not on paper, and it's not in a sketch pad. It might be a couple of things in a sketch pad once in a while. But generally speaking, it's thinking time, quiet time. It might be that I've sat in my chair in my studio and stared at the canvas and thought about how it's going to look on there, and then get up and do it. But it might be that I've sat and thought more than one time. Or it might be that I haven't resolved it and I get in the car and I go somewhere and suddenly it comes to me. And then when I go home, I can do it, or back to the studio, I can do it. But I think that it's very normal, and I don't think I'm any different than any of my friends that are actually selling artists, professional artists, would say the same thing. Unless it's assigned to you, and even when it's assigned, you have to go through this process. But the process is a little longer sometimes when you're just free to do what you want to do, and to make it say what you want it to say. And once I start, certainly I will adjust as I go, but once I start, it's pretty much ready to roll. And people will say, what are you doing to painters? What are you doing? You don't think you're working. And that's a hard thing to fight, because you are working. And a lot of people that aren't creative or are more functional in a task-oriented manner, like really work well on the computer all day long, I couldn't do that. That would make me crazy. And I admire that skill, but those sorts of folks sometimes will discourage an artist because they don't think you're doing anything, or they don't believe that you're doing anything because they can't relate. The most challenging is doing something I haven't done yesterday. But in the long run, I wouldn't keep painting if I had to just repaint and repaint. Like these ladies, I won't be painting them in 2 years. I'll have figured out some other woman thing or person thing that I want to be doing. Or maybe not. I'm older, maybe I'll stay with them, but I've always just kind of gotten an idea and gotten it to where I love it, and then find another path. Beauty and line. But there's artists that I love and that I'm just amazed by, but they're pretty much the same ones everybody else is amazed by and loves. I mean, I could give you a string of names of the Impressionist or the Renaissance painters. I mean, Michelangelo, his David, the real David, the one in Florence, there's nothing like it in my book. You know, that's like, I saw the one outside in Florence. I've seen them in actually 2 other places. But when you go in and you see the one in, I think it's in the Academy. Anyway, when you go in Florence, you can edit that. When you go in Florence and you see the real David, I mean, it's just amazing. So, yeah, some of the great painters, but I've never aspired to be like them. So I'm always interested. I always want to read. But I guess Van Gogh and Michelangelo would be my 2 because of his drawing skills. They're so gorgeous. I guess Da Vinci's creativity and Van Gogh's color. Those would be the 3 that I would just be the most attracted to. This lady is oil. She's oil. These 2 are acrylics. These are acrylics, these are from a job, they're not finished. So those are water-based oils that I use with the palette knife. And this whole one style is kind of fun. For instance, these women right there are the same characters that are going to be right here, but these are nostalgic Richmond. So that would add another element to it. It's not just large, colorful women. Now it's large, colorful women who lives in the city that you live in and are taking a taxi. And it's going to be hung with Main Street Station, which is going to be this size. That is, I just did it on a long canvas. So I could go from just women to groups of women to women doing things we know about in our own life here in Richmond. Do you want to see a children's portrait? Oh, this is a watercolor flower. Not a children's portrait, but it is a watercolor. I think it goes like this. Okay. So this is with underglass, a children's portrait. This is an unfinished child's portrait. I haven't done the hair. This was my daughter when I painted her all those times. So that would be an early portrait of her.